question. If I did not end my fullest journey and return immediately, in the eyes of the Holy Order, I would be a heretic, a pathless one, someone who had strayed from his way. The fact that I belonged to the cleric was only of minor concern. When I thought of Malthus and his 101 verses, doubt and bitterness intersected my feeling of liberation like a mental sword. Yet, it felt the same when I thought about returning. The dull feeling in my stomach lurked inside of me. When on the second day of my journey, I tried to take a few steps back to Fogville, the very same terrible panic arose that had led to the breakdown in my chamber. No, the only way that I could take now was the one leading through my suppressed memories, away from my false life. I had not the slightest idea where to start looking for the lost fragments of my childhood. I had only been 2 years old when Gilman had found me. What could have had happened to shape my life to such an extent? I had only one clue to find answers, the ominous words of the veiled woman. To trust these words was as foolish and irrational as trusting a Grenarian bone reader, but I had no choice. Follow the fire. I halted for a moment and wiped the sweat off my forehead. After I had descended from the Fogville cliff, I had taken a small path along the coast. Now I was at the border to the heartland. Ark was about 11 days' march away, but I intended to use my last pennies to pay a myriad flight to the capital. The overgrown streets leading through the Indralian forests were too dangerous. At the moment, I wandered on a halfway paved path between colorful meadows. The sound of birds was in the air, and the sun was burning on the back of my neck. You are insane, Jael. Simply insane, I thought as I looked back. Indeed, what I did was contradicting everything the holy verses had taught me. Only about 7 turns of the moon ago, I had accompanied a small group of boys and girls of appropriate age through their consecration. I remembered how a smart, red-haired Eterna girl spoke to me during one of the preparation lessons. Her hair was fine and straight, as it was usual with the pointy-eared race. What if I did not want to become a tailoress? She had asked me after I had explained the importance of their upcoming names day ceremony to the children. What is your name, young girl? I answered smilingly. The determined look had not vanished from her eyes. Selena, father, my name is Selena. Selena, very well. Let me give you a small riddle. Or rather, let me give you all a small riddle. She had furrowed her eyebrows and looked at me skeptically, more like a grown woman than a young girl. Imagine yourselves as brave explorers. It is your holy mission, personally assigned to you by the holy leader of the order, to discover new All children agreed that Ralof was supposed to carry the wood and Gilma to keep the watch. The game went on until all tasks were assigned to the pioneers, according to their physical and mental conditions. But now something bothersome happens. Ralof feels exploited and does not want to collect any more firewood. The said boy looked indignantly at me, but I calmed him with a gesture of my hand. Of course, he behaves like this only in my story. By all means, he does not want to go looking for firewood anymore. He says he wants to keep watch with Gilma, even though all of you know that he would not be able to hit a blind, paralyzed troll with his bow. Now, my question to you is this. What would be best for all of you if Ralof came to reason, or if he, from now on, kept watch and Gilma collected the wood instead? The children voted unanimously for the first choice. Very well. Only this way you will be able to defy fatigues, hunger, and cold on the inhospitable island until a galley arrives and brings you back to Enderall. This is the essence of what the Holy Scriptures teaches us. Unity and strength can only emerge in a community that serves the welfare of all and not only of an individual. Malthus himself chooses our divine tasks, for who else knows our strengths and weaknesses better than the one who gives our mothers the gift of fertility each moon? With a satisfied smile, my gaze wandered back to the one who initially had asked the question. And that, dear Selena, is the answer to your question. Even if you have doubts about the path that Malthus is soon going to choose for you, defy them as you defy a disease, for only a people united in flesh and mind will be able to prevail eternally. The children's answer was rapt silence. Selena, however, had not lost her skeptical look after I had told my story that was inspired by the first verse of The Path. The Path. Had I ever believed in it? I did not know. It was what Mother Pele had told me. It was what I was supposed to believe. If even I, an educated man with access to so much knowledge, was able to discover the decayed memories of childhood only after a vision, what about other people? Do they all live a false life? But if it shot through my head, the path is indeed a lie, what then guides us? This heretic thought kept me busy until the sun set. Not before the sun had disappeared almost entirely behind the horizon, I recognized signs of human life on the trail again. Like the 4 days before, I had been wandering through pines and cypresses, encountering no human soul, but now a giant field of wheat lay before me, and in the middle of it stood a windmill high as a tower. Its wheel turned slowly in the evening wind, and a mixture of dusty earth, moss, and freshly cut grass was in the air. For a moment, the rustic beauty of the sight made me forget my aching legs and the dull feeling in my stomach. Reflexively, I jumped to the side, and the flank of one of the horses barely missed me. I uttered a scared cry and stumbled as I tried to regain my balance. I landed in the dust with a muffled thud. What in blazes? Indignantly, I looked at the two riders who came to a halt in front of me. They both were very tall and wore solid leather garments, just like hunters. Their horses were black, indicating an expensive breed. Angrily, I watched them dismounting, throwing a penny to a slender boy who probably was the stable lad, and disappearing into the tavern. Even then, I hated complacent and crude people. Did these two apes even realize that they almost had run me down? Probably not. And if they did, they would not even look at you. My lips shrank to a thin line. Damn primitives. But my mind was too exhausted to allow any more angry thoughts, so I shrugged resignedly, picked up my staff from the ground, and went to the farmhouse. An overwhelming scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, and my anger was gone. One last time, I looked at the tavern sign that was shaking in the wind. The Red Ox. This is where I was going to spend the first civilized night of my new life. When I entered the tavern, I could hear a pleasant mixture of voices, clinking goblets and crackling fire. The cold left my limbs immediately, and my mouth was watering. During my long march, I had only eaten some pieces of my bread and a few handfuls of whisperweed, so I was hungry. The tavern was well frequented, which explained the empty streets outside. I assumed that it served as some kind of meeting point for the local farmers. There was space for about 30 souls in the room, and almost all of the chairs, stools, and benches were occupied. Torches lit the room and cast dancing shadows of the guests at the wall. I mustered the people. Next to the entrance, a tired-looking man extensively studied a yellowed pictured book called The Mary Eterna Damsel. Its saucy images looked as if they were not exclusively drawn for ethnologists. A bearded bard turned his lute on a shamefully tiny pedestal. He was probably preparing to sing his next song, which would be devoured by the noise around him. Just in front of me sat an enviable, attractive, well-dressed man who talked to a woman whose countenance showed utter devotion. I estimated him to be 35 winters old. His hair was jet black, his face was masculine yet delicate, and he wore a 3-day stubble. Unwittingly, I distorted my mouth. Certainly, he is one of the prigs from the upper city, one of those who shag around and waste their inheritance. When I had finished the thought, the beau noticed my staring. For a moment, he looked at me with sparkling eyes and smiled, fetching and narcissistic at the same time. Then he turned back to his admirer. The other guests were travelers and farmers of all sorts, man and woman, young and old, tall and short. I felt misplaced, like a Northman on the Quinarian Bazaar, strange and uneasy among the rough people to which I did not belong. Hastily, I went to also had a chin that could shatter walls made of northwind stone. For a moment, I felt the urge to grab the mug in front of me and pour beer into their faces. However, the idea vanished when the two noticed me. Unwittingly, I ducked my head as they gave me an amused look and turned their attention back to their stew. They have not even recognized me. With a slight nod of my head, I summoned the barmaid who was cleaning mugs behind the counter. She came closer, sized me up, and gave me an amused look. "Mattress, what may I get you?" she said with a rough voice. At least she had the decency to address me as an urban citizen. I tried not to show my inner turmoil. "A glass of goat's milk, please." I was trying to sound masculine and confident, but my voice, coarse and untrained after 4 days of silence, was a pitiful croak. The reactions could not have been more intense had I asked for the crown jewels of the Golden Queen, while the barmaid only smiled and shook her head in sympathy. The two primitives next to me broke out laughing heavily. "Goat's milk," one of them roared, patting his comrade's shoulder. "He wants a glass of goat's milk." I stared at the giant with a mixture of irritation and defiance. I probably could have avoided the further events of the evening if I had not responded, even though numerous snappy answers wandered around in my head. The one I finally gave them, my arms crossed in front of my chest, was pathetic. "Yes, goat's milk," I said with a shaking voice. "Do you have a problem with it?" This seemed to intensify the amusement of the apes. This time, their laughter was so loud that even the bearded bard stopped playing the lute, and as many other guests turned his insulted yet curious gaze toward the counter. After they had finished laughing and patting each other's shoulders affirmatively, the buccaneer spoke to me. "By no means, Mattress," he said with a sympathetic voice. "It's just, unfortunately, the tavern is out of goat's milk." He paused for a while, grinning. "Maybe you want to try the Harlot's Inn in the bathhouse of Ark." This time, they almost burst with laughter. I felt fierce anger arise in me. Never since I had become a priest I was treated with such disrespect. Never. "I will do that when I visit you next time in the ape's compound." I froze up. The snappish response had come from my mouth faster than I was thinking, and I had the feeling that the cheerful atmosphere around the two I saw how the other man pushed something to him on the counter, so how about a little refreshment? With this last word, he removed his hand from my mouth, quickly grabbed the bowl, and poured its content over my head. It was stew, and if the encounter had occurred a few minutes earlier, the broth would probably have scalded my skin. Nevertheless, I was covered in hot, sticky slime. I was shocked, and I gasped for air so that some of the broth got into my windpipe. I broke down and panted, coughing out the liquid. The meaty brew dripped down my hair, and some of it found its way into my garment, running down my spine. I heard roaring laughter around me. I was certain that most of it came from the buccaneer and his chum, but some of those who had watched the events before were laughing now as well. I felt how my stomach cramped and shame rose up in me. There I was, broken down, coughing stew, the laughing stock. I had an impulse to jump up and grab the buccaneer's throat, but my reason suppressed it instantly. I was deeply humiliated, but I had no death wish, so I tried to raise myself up in a controlled and dignified manner and removed pieces of meat from my clothes. Indeed, my indifference and serenity would be enough of a lesson for the two brutes. I gathered all my priestly courage and turned around. They looked at me amused and challenging. They want me to keep acting defiantly, I thought. They want me to keep provoking them. I did not stand the slightest chance against any of them in close combat, that was for sure. After all, I had as much knowledge about brawls as a troll about hair care. Just leave, Shale. Leave and swallow down your damn pride. I peered at the crowd. Most of the guests had returned to their meals or conversations. Only a few of them still looked at me expectantly. Among them, the black-haired beau. Nobody seemed to despise the impudence of the two men at all. Abruptly, I realized what had protected me from events like this my entire life: my priest's robe. It had been the only reason why the other boys had stopped mocking me after my consecration, and probably it was the only reason why everyone lowered their heads devoutly, or at least had the decency not to pour stew on me when I entered a tavern. You are a nobody, Shale. Without your priest's robe, you are just another common man, neither big nor slim, neither old nor young, neither ugly nor handsome, meaningless. For a brief moment, I felt the urge to draw the priest's brooch, which I had not had the heart to leave behind, from my bag. Oh, how they would look at me, the primitives. They would begin to recite the prayer of the path with eyes widened by fear, asking me for forgiveness. They would respect me, what you represent. Yes, they would bow their head in reverence because they fear the power of the Holy Order. Of course they would. To disregard a priest of the path was a capital crime, and only a fool would risk such a punishment. No, to reveal myself as a priest would not only mean to rely on the authority of others, but also to return to my false life. I already felt my brigands and marauders, preferably in public. My jaw cramped and I noticed how the feeling in my stomach had started to change. The dull feeling of insecurity had transformed into a flaming rage, paired with an iron determination. I will not begin my new life in disgrace. I opened my eyes again and looked at the candle that the innkeeper had given to me. The flame burned and cracked, and in a strange way its fire strengthened my determination. I wanted to teach the two apes a lesson, even if it was the last thing I did in my life. But how? What can I do except for preaching, reading books, and mixing herbs? I halted. Yes, now I was almost grateful that the two disrespectful primitives had crossed my way, right here and now. A malicious grin bloomed on my lips, and I turned my gaze back to the window. For a short moment, I marveled about the man who looked at me from the silent glass. His pale blue eyes looked like burning ice, a contradiction that seemed to be as natural to him as the fire of the sun in autumn twilight. He did not resemble the cringing priest anymore, who had given the blessing to washwomen only a week ago. Yes, the man emitted something like power, determination, fire. That concludes chapter 3. I hope y'all have a good morning, day, night, and evening. Rest well.